Hello, welcome back to another video. Today I'm doing my 15.3 ADC tier list. So if you enjoy content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a couple of changes this patch. Most notably, MF got tagged. They also buffed up Samira and Swain. Axiomark and his Twitch is quite heavily on the rise. They are nerfing it in 15.4. And then some other champions are just moving around. So let's get into it. The D tier is going to consist of two champions now. One is Smorder, who remains within the D tier. He's a champion I would still recommend avoiding. You can play him, and I think most ADCs are viable, especially if you're very comfortable on them. Like Smorder and Kaiser, who are my two D tier options at the moment. I don't think either of these champions are unplayable. I think both of them have spots where you could just pick them and perform relatively well. I think Kaiser's a bit harder to pilot at the moment, and oftentimes when Kaiser's win rate is pretty heavily deflated or low, the champion tends to require a lot more out of the piloter of it to really find success and build optimization to really min-max the full value of the champion. In Smolder's case, he got buffed more recently. The IE change was nice. It now makes the item feel quite good on him. The IE change going into 15.4 will also encourage him to pick it up more often. I think both these champions could comfortably be considered C tier picks. I don't think there is a huge gap between the C tier and the D tier at the moment, to the point where you could argue that these champions could just be in there with the rest. The champions moving out of the D tier then are Samira, who has been buffed. The champion is doing a bit better at the moment. The buff, although not big, does matter. It allows her to more consistently combo. It allows her to siege more effectively as well. That is something definitely people might not look at the change and instantly think of. But having 2 more seconds on that E duration allows you to maybe weave in 1-2 more autos onto the tower. Just helps her when she has access to a lot of AD, just siege and be more effective as a champion. So I think she needs a bit more to really compete with the rest of the pool. But she's also a very hard to play champion. She's got a relatively similar mastery curve to the likes of Draven. Needs to be very accelerated early onto the game to kind of find her effectiveness. But this change definitely does help her, and still, when she's stable, she will be a very powerful champion. Tristana was the other champion which I was moving out of the D tier. I had been dragging my feet on Tristana for a while about where I really think this champion has landed after it changes, but as people have gained more mastery on the pick, people have relearned ADC Tristana, as most of our player base had moved to mid lane or were just not really piloting the champion. The changes were different. It changed the shape of the pick, and people had to obviously relearn it. And I think over time, the champion's definitely gone up. The pick is definitely performing a bit better at the moment, and I'm going to bump her all the way to the B tier. She probably should have been in the C tier at least over the last couple of patches, but now I'm gonna move her up even more. I think if you're very comfortable on the pick and you can consistently snowball your advantages, she could be a great option. She has great siege, she has great wave clear, decent scaling, can be relatively oppressive early on into the game if you are getting those advantages and pairing her with the correct supports. I think this champion deserves a spot here. The C tier event is going to consist of the same champions as before, the likes of Aphelios. Not quite there. I think if you're good on the pick, he is still a very powerful option. He scales incredibly well. He is the premier kind of him and Jinx are the two picks you look at and go, if you give them a lot of gold, they will print damage. He can be a very effective champion with the time on him. If you obviously aren't willing to put practice into him, he is a pick which I'd recommend avoiding. He is one of the harder ADCs to learn. Mastering weapon rotations, being very, very aware of your spacing and positioning to maximize your DPS output are all very, very key skills of this champion. And yeah, they kind of prohibit him from being higher up at the moment. But if you're comfortable on Aphelios, he's a great option. I think you should probably keep playing your champion, as I believe most people who play Aphelios are mains of their pick. Lucian is alright. I'd still say this champion's slightly underperformant at the moment. He sits in the C tier. I think he is a bit more reliant on pairings than a lot of the other champion pool within the ADC role. If you put him with the right things, like your Nami's, even your Yumi's at the moment, he can be a very effective damage champion. Obviously his safety early on into the game with his dash and his ability to cast abilities more at range can give him safety and allow him to just see us from afar if he is in harder matchups. with his shorter range especially. But if you are able to get to like those mid-game points where you are able to like find angles on mid lane and then just like drop damage and then cast your ultimate into like one-shot combo, like that can be a really effective way of just playing the champion, just focusing around like accelerating and just like being as powerful as you can in the middle of the game. He will fall off compared to other marksmen. He just doesn't have the range. He's kind of similar to Corki in that vein, where he has to act more like an assassin, like a skirmisher, to just find those angles, one-shot a target, and maybe like trade or just try and do as much as possible. Corki has a bit more range with like his ultimate, but even then, as Corki, you still just want to go in and then like try and find those like angles where you can just one-shot people. But he sits like Lucian sits as more like a C-tier option at the moment. I would recommend Corki over him. He's easier to pilot and stronger in the current state of the game. Ashe is definitely underperforming at the moment. She sits towards the low end of the C tier for a champion, which is perceived as easy and should be more beginner friendly. She's definitely one of the weaker options at the moment, pretty comfortably competing with the D tier picks like your Smolders and your Kaisers. Champion still has access to a lot of utility, and that can definitely be a shining kind of star of the champion, and she is being buffed in 15.4, so I would recommend relearning or picking up the champion going into next patch. So I do think the changes are quite nice for her. Whether they'll push her back into the meta, I don't think so, but she should sit as like a B tier option again. And yeah, if you're looking for someone with a bit more utility like your Jins and your Ashes, then they can be good champions to go to. Draven and Kalista are two very, very elite skewed champions. They sit in my C tier, albeit both of them can comfortably compete with the S tier options. Kalista is getting nerfed in 15.4. I believe she is number 1 marksman in competitive at the moment. That doesn't surprise me. She relies quite heavily on like her synergies with support. Like Renata and Kalista is obviously a very well known pairing, but things like Nico Kalista, very oppressive. And even like your engaged supports can work really nicely with Kalista, just making sure you're rotating your marks and just outputting as much damage and like spears into a target, and then like shifting your priorities and just moving around into the spots you need to be in. Very hard champion to pilot, kind of akin to like Aphelios, like Draven, but like all three of these champions very hard to pilot in the ADC role. They're not the picks I would really recommend for mid MMR, but if you're very comfortable in them, you've put a lot of practice into them, they are good options. Like you can win on these champions, and you can definitely climb all the way like through the ranks if you are performing well on these. But there are easier options which I'd recommend over them, which arguably have clearer game plans and don't fall off in like games where they are more traditionally going to go longer, especially in mid elo, low elo, which is where the game duration is slightly longer. But Draven, kind of akin to Samira, really reliant on accelerating advantages, but if you can find those advantages and like take over the game, making sure you're closing out pre 30 minutes, then this champion can be a very effective way to climb. Actually, no champions are dropping down to the C tier. So the B tier then is going to remain relatively similar. The likes of Xayah are champions which I think in the right spots can be very, very powerful picks. Output a huge amount of damage, has really good self-peeling tools. Not quite like an AS tier champion. She just doesn't have the same level of DPS and range as some of those options. And in solo queue, that can, I mean, I would oftentimes recommend that over like a pick like Xayah, and like ease of play. I think Xayah is a bit harder to play than a traditional marksman, but she is still very solid in the like in specific spots. Jhin has access to a bit more utility, can output a lot of damage, doesn't have the same level of DPS as like your A and your S tier options, but still a very, very effective pick. Yasuo, obviously going to be a bit more niche within the bot lane role, but still very powerful here. Tends to be his most performant role. Yasuo wants to play into range where he can effectively use his mobility to chase them down the lane, and his windmill to effectively mitigate the damage he receives. With the buffs directly coming into him and the IE change next patch, I believe Yasuo bot lane will be an A, possibly even considered an S tier pick. You do spike more on like your 2 free item now with like the IE change and the crit change. Like if you can pick up an early Cloak of Agility building into shield bow, that can be a really effective way of just like making yourself very, very powerful on like a few crits. Obviously you're still going Bork, I believe, first. There might be like things where you go like a Zeal, or like you just sit on a Cloak of Agility. It'd be interesting to see what like the trends are for Yasuo next patch, but definitely be aware of him. He is going to get a lot stronger going into 15.4. Varus is probably number 2, I believe, marksman in competitive, like Corki being number 3, I want to say. This champion's obviously very powerful of both of its lethality and on-hit builds. I traditionally recommend on-hit in solo queue. The Ginsu Hullbreaker build looks very performant, gives you a lot of durability, a lot of damage. It's very hard to itemize against you. The just standard Bork variant of on hit is also fine, like your Bork, Ginsu, Terminus, Jack Show like variant can also be very powerful, and the lethality build can be really good in specific spots. You do need good teams to play around you though. Like if your teammates do not play around your ability to like harass pre-objective, it will feel really lackluster compared to the other two options. But I think Varus has one of the most powerful ultimates of like any like ADC, has a huge amount of variance in what he can do. I think he's a great pick to learn and just have within your arsenal. Is he the optimal champion to play in solo queue at the moment? I don't believe so. I think he's a bit harder to pilot, and being able to pick what you want in specific situations is a skill of its own. But if you are very comfortable with champion, he is one of the premier picks in competitive, high elo. Definitely a champion I would recommend playing at some point. Actually, I'll talk about Ezreal and then I'll talk about the other one. So Ezreal, we've seen talk about lethal tempo Ezreal. I've actually seen it a bit in competitive, I believe. Dragdar's been talking about it, being like hyping it up. I don't know if it's all that. I think it is fine as like an option. I think PTA Ezreal is also still very good, and Conqueror is decent in the right spots. Overall though, I mean, the champion's still very much like how good the Ezreal is oftentimes how good the pilot of the champion is. This champion can translate all the way up through the ranks to the highest of Challenger, but if you can't pilot it well, it is just not going to get you the results. You do need to put a lot of practice into Ezreal. You just need to have good general game knowledge and understanding of skill shots and how to really min-max the kind of effectiveness of a pick like this. The likes of Brand and Ziggs, I have towards the end of the B tier. Honestly, like, actually, I'll put Cassiopeia and Lux because I have dropped some champions down. But some of the mages which I have within the B tier, like your Brand's, very conditional. He oftentimes just wants to be paired with the Nami. He can work with other things, and the only thing propping him up as a B tier option right now is the fact that he is very easy to play. Ziggs is just underperforming across both bot and mid. Honestly, both these champions could arguably drop down all the way to the C tier. I think they are two of the weaker mages you can play at the moment. I think Cassiopeia is fine into some of the shorter range marksmen, but into range she struggles, and the nerfs this patch have definitely dropped her down slightly. I think Lux just needs a lot of gold to really snowball her advantages. She also just wants some level of CC to kind of hold someone in place so she can output the full damage combo she needs. Not a pick I would recommend within the bot lane, but as she is very popular, you can definitely try bring her here and make her work. I think she is a fine option, and mages traditionally aren't going to be as demanding as some of the ADC options. They can just sit back, clear waves. They always have like this just like fallback pattern, arguably. It's why like Kog'Maw, the AP Kog'Maw was pretty heavily nerfed, because it was just a very, very uninteractive way of playing laning phase and just getting the gold and then scaling up, or just being basically non-interactive and just like harassing someone under tower. These kind of playstyles are relatively simple to play and can create very, very bad game states. But yeah, overall these champions, I think if you are comfortable on them, they are still fine. I think Brand and Ziggs are definitely the weaker of the two, but and Cassiopeia is a bit more conditional, but like Lux can just be a fine option within the AP pool. The likes of Seraphine and Veigar and even Karthus, I think, are like lower A2 options at the moment. Karthus is very unpopular as an AP option within the bot lane at the moment. He is like him and Cassiopeia are the two lowest by quite a margin. The likes of Seraphine's just not as performant at the moment, and Veigar is only really good in lower MMR brackets. I think these three champions are also a bit more conditional, require a lot more practice. In Karthus' case, require a decent amount of practice. I think Seraphine and Veigar you can kind of just pick up and play. But yeah, but I'd say all three of these champions definitely sit apart from the other A2 options. But I think if you put the practice into them, they can be very good and effective ways to climb. And so move Veigar. Veigar, I think, is a bit more just, you can go through low, mid, when you'll struggle a lot more into high, as the game will just happen around you, and oftentimes you won't get to be the scaling pick you want, and you won't get the levels to like amp your AP ratios. That would definitely cause a lot more like of a pain point. Zeri, I'm going to drop down to the B tier. She's still a good option, and with the Zeri buffs more recently, like the Zeri Yumi pairing is very, very powerful. The direct buffs to Yuntao's also really helped her. I think if you have the practice on her, she is a good option. She's not like a C, D tier, like a void pick. She is a good pick in the hands of someone who can pilot the champion well. Sivir remains as an A tier option. She sits towards the lower end of the A tier. The champion can still output huge amounts of DPS. She's very easy to play, scales really nicely, has good wave clear, lacks the mobility, or lacks the like the dashes which some of the other marksmen have, like the escape tool. Her tool is her spell shield, which can be good against specific champions like Varus ult, or like empowered Qs, and Asher ults can be like good for like good tools you can block. But she can still struggle. Obviously, like Jarvan can be a very, very big pain point for the likes of Sivir, and that is probably her biggest vulnerability at the moment. Plus, she doesn't have the same level of like damage and like effectiveness, arguably early on to the game, that some of the other marksmen do, which is where I'd say her biggest weaknesses lie. Vayne sits within the A tier. The amount of health within the game at the moment has really benefited Vayne. She is a really good tank shredder. The Bork Ginsu's build, still very effective, but you can go the likes of Kraken, you can go the likes of Trinity. There are different ways of playing Vayne. She definitely spikes in mid elo to go like into high, but then falls off quite aggressively Master Plus, where other champions are just able to abuse their range against her, and spacing can oftentimes, like in lane, can definitely be a big factor. I think laning phase matters a lot less. The lower down you go, you can get away with it because most games go long and people won't translate their advantages as well. I think Vayne can really benefit from that, so I do recommend learning Vayne at the moment. I think she's in a pretty good spot at in her current state, and really benefits from just high health pools. And if you're like very much like of the solo carry mindset, Vayne is a great option for you. Tends to be pretty heavily OTP'd. Like most OTPs will, just continue to play the champion no matter what state the pick is in. So Vayne, I'd say she's a solid A tier pick at the moment. Mel, don't fall for the bait of WMAX. Freak has mentioned that it was a bug within the system, but it's like recommending WMAX second, and a lot of people have just started doing that. You should go Q into E, and that will gain back some of the power which a lot of people have lost. I think the champion is still very, very solid as a bot laner. Like both mid and bot lane Mel are pretty good options at the moment. Support looks to be her weakest role. Her long range harass combined with her very powerful like basic ability on the W into specific team compositions, combined with like the E snare and the damage output like burst she has with like the ultimate, just give her a lot of tools. Her biggest weakness, kind of akin to Hui, is her lack of mobility. That does punish her quite a lot. Like champion like assassins and tanks, if they get on top of her, just cause a lot of issues. That is where Mel will falter as a pick. But if you can stay at range, you can just harass people out with your damage and your abilities. She is a great option, and I think she's a very deserving A tier pick. We'll see how the changes into 15.4 go, as they are like changing a lot of power around, and I think it's going to be mainly a nerf more than anything. Victor remains as an A tier pick. He's still a pretty solid bot lane option. He is losing play rate by the day though. The pick wants to be able to get to like specific points within the mid game, like his evolve spikes, his item spikes are very, very crucial to him. But his ultimate is a very powerful tool. If you get it going, once you have the full evolve on it, it can be a lot of damage within a team fight. Obviously that's not the key factor you're playing him for, but it is a nice addition. The main things are like the wave clear, the ability to stall out games kind of akin to Hui, and just the damage output combined with the trading, which is quite impressive early on to the game now if you're opting into like an airy scorch setup with like Shield Bash for example. I think the champ's still a solid bot lane option. He's not the Thanos pick which he was maybe on his first release of the new edition of Victor, but the two direct navs did obviously hit him quite a bit, but he is still a very solid option. I'd say he's a deserving A tier pick at the moment. My final mage within the A tier is Swain. I think the Swain buffs this patch were really big for him. Swain bot lane has always been his most performant role, but both Swain bot and mid are very, very good options at the moment. He gives him a lot of flexibility. He's technically viable for roles, but top and support tend to be a bit more conditional. Well, in top's case, conditional support, Swain, I still just don't like as an option. I think it is fine, low elo, but then tends to lack the kind of things it wants higher up, like mid into high elo. It can definitely struggle a lot more there. Overall, though, I think Swain is a great high A tier option in his current state. Some of the marksmen here are your likes of Cogmore, who is being nerfed next patch. I think Cog is a very good high A tier pick. If you pair him with a Lulu, he does a huge amount of damage. The attack speed cap, he was one of the few champions which benefited from the attack speed cap being pushed up, so that was very nice for him. And yeah, he's a very, very solid high A tier. Basic. Honestly, I might put Cog and Twitch both in the S tier. I'll talk about Twitch in a second. The other A tier options are Corki and Caitlyn, and Nyla actually. I think Nyla sits towards the high end of the A tier. She's very unpopular, but very, very powerful if paired with the right champions. Caitlyn, I'm not as big of a fan on. Like, Caitlyn does do a huge amount of damage, and if you are moving her around the map, giving her all the resources she needs, she is one of the best win condition champions in the game, being able to abuse 650 range and just having great control with her traps. That being said, though, she is a hard to pilot pick. She, not mechanically, but like more macro wise, and just not a pick I'd recommend climbing with through the lower ranks, but always a pick to just learn at some point. And if you can effectively play Caitlyn, she is a great champion to have within your arsenal. And then Corki, still an incredibly oppressive early game pick. He will win most lanes just outright through his stat checky nature. He is easy to play, great for like beginners who just want to play a lane bully. Definitely a champion I'd recommend in the current state of the game, just to have as like an early lane bully. Twitch's case, he is really benefiting from Axiom Arcanist at the moment. It is being changed on him in 15.4 because of just how strong the interaction is. Like, that is a difference between almost being like a B to like an S tier champion. Just that rune alone, giving access to so much more damage within his ultimate, is very powerful. And if you can get like have more ult uptime with the CD refund of takedown, great in his current state. So yeah, Twitch very deserving of an S tier spot. Both Twitch and Cookmore output huge amounts of DPS within fights. Same goes for like Jinx and Hui. I think I actually just put all the rest of the champions on him. So in Hui's case, he is my premier AP pick. He is going to be nerfed in 15.4. Unfortunately, well, good for balance wise, but like unfortunately is because he was like hidden OP bot lane for a while. I think most people have realized that Hui bot is just overpowered in his current state, though. He basically has infinite wave clear. Like, it's very hard to siege against a champion like Hui. His damage is very high, his DPS is very high, he scales relatively well, he's pretty hard to assail early on to the game, especially after Lost Chapter, and it makes him a very, very solid bot lane pick. If you put the time into him, he is, yeah, the best option, which I'd recommend at the moment. MF got tagged last patch, well, going into this patch. They took away some of her base armor, they took away some of her armor growth, and in a role which is primarily dominated by marksman and physical damage, that means quite a lot. She is no longer going to be able to, let's say she loses 2 to 3 autos sometimes in like trades, maybe like even just 1 to 2, that will be the difference between killing a target and then dying and then causing a snowball effect, and then enemy Jinx has maybe 1, 2 takedowns and suddenly is able to run away with the game. Jinx being the most popular ADC, I believe, at the moment. Not by like a large margin, as she was actually pretty close, but yeah, Jinx is my recommended go-to. She actually probably should just sit in the S+. She isn't being nerfed in 15.4, which is a genuine shock. This champion is output so much damage, is going to be buffed with the IE changes next patch. Other things like being nerfed or shifted down have really benefited her, and she is, like with the MF nerfs, probably the go-to recommended marksman at the moment. Just, yeah, 1-2 kills early on into the laning phase is all that sometimes you need to take over the game and just output huge amounts of damage. The likes of Lulu paired alongside Jinx can just turn her into this champion, which is incredibly hard to kill and can just print damage for the most part. So definitely be aware of Jinx. She is the pick I would recommend everyone plays at the moment. Obviously, it's going to get banned, it's going to get taken away, but there are other options like your Twitches, your Cogmos, so there's a bit more niche picks. Corki, Varus, still great options, especially the higher up you go. There are other good mage options, and there are other good picks, which if you have put the practice into, like your Vaynes, for example, and your Caitlyn's and your Nylas, can compete against her if you are very comfortable on your pick. So yeah, those are my thoughts for the 15.3 ADC tier list. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.